Hey, welcome to the Wake Coaching Podcast. So glad you're joining us today. But what I'm most excited about is we get to hear today from Allie's parents, Bill and Lisa. So glad you guys are here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Literally
Good to be here.
Honored to have you guys here. You guys are in for a treat today because I get to ask questions about what it's like to have a family business and work as a family. And what that's like. And I can imagine like you guys, we could just push record and listen for hours of like best practices and how you found those. And oh my gosh, like, you know, there was this issue that created this solution, or this person that created this problem, that created this. We could talk for hours. But so I just want to talk about what are some fun things about family business that you enjoyed. And Allie, if you could just set us up, like how long did you work together? What was the business? Ready to go.
Okay, so I was a part of the family business. It was called Supportive Living Solutions. We provided housing and services to adults with mental illness, chemical dependency, and homelessness in the Twin Cities, so Minneapolis, Minnesota, mostly. I was there for 16 years, but the company was started by my grandma, who was my dad's mom. She was an addict, got sober, wanted to give back to the sober community. That's where it all started. And then she passed away kind of unexpectedly and at a pretty young age. And my dad took over the business and grew it. And so it's now been in operation for how long?
50 years.
50 years.
Wow,
Crazy.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Now, Bill, let me ask you, how long did you, like at what year did you step in and begin to operate it at?
So I took over in 1996. My sister had taken it over when my mother died in 1988. And my sister had an untimely death at the age of 56 in 1996. And so I was just the president of the board. I didn't work for the company. And it was in pretty bad shape financially. There was really no leadership there that could take it over and really survive. And I approached the board and offered to take it over because I felt like it would fail and I wanted to give the company a chance.
Yeah.
So they voted unanimously to have me take it over.
And I was just going to mention, side note, that was at the same time that you two were leading a church that you had
Yes.
also started. How
Yeah.
many years into the church was that when you also now took on the business?
Just 2 years.
Oh my
Oh.
goodness.
Yeah.
And so in 1996,
I mean, I was here
how
for
old
all
were
of
you?
that, but I don't remember all the timelines.
You were 10.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. And super excited we had our own copier.
Yes.
That was the highlight for her.
real?
Yeah.
I loved being in the office at church. I really thought I was one of the pastors at the church. I mean, I was there a lot.
Right.
So 1996, you took over. How old was it at that point, the company?
It was started in
20.
1973, so in 96 it would have been 23 years
23
old.
years old, okay.
Yeah.
So basically the last 27 years, it's been under your leadership
Yes.
in some form or fashion. You sold it a couple years ago. We'll talk about that in a moment. But like, wow, 25 years of actively leading that. You told the story, you just mentioned it, and I've heard nuggets of it, so I'm glad to hear it in person. But literally, like the company was not doing well. Like 23 years in, you're like, okay, is this going to survive?
Right.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, my sister was a very good technician, so to speak. She was really good with counseling chemically dependent people, helping them in their recovery. But in the area of leadership, she was really weak. And she was also very, very weak in finance. So when she passed away, the company was insolvent. And there just was no good leadership there. And the field itself really didn't lend itself much to leadership principles. They're very therapeutically based. And a lot of the organizations in our field are very, very weak because of that. They just put no value on organizational leadership and running things like a business.
And that can happen in the church world too.
Yeah.
So kind of both of those.
That's an interesting thing, even like the idea like leading with heart versus, I would say heart versus head.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes like if you're in a nonprofit space, which with a lot of health and human services
Yes.
organizations and churches are nonprofits. So when you lead with head, I mean, what are some of the pushback that you get? Because you think about like, oh, well, you have to have like empathy and sympathy and love, and you have to jump on board, and almost like you can create a bit of a savior complex at times if you're in that space and you're only focused on the heart. But with the head, sometimes you come in and you could get pushback. Do you have any stories of pushback you got?
We got a lot of that
Yeah.
from our
Yes.
staff, because the whole educational, the academics around it are all, they wear their heart on their sleeve, and
Sure.
and so many of the companies are nonprofits, and so when they get in trouble, they can appeal to the community and raise money to make up for their shortfalls. And we were also a nonprofit, but it really, believe it or not, the chemical dependency side where we started was not a very sympathetic cause. It was very difficult to raise money for chemically dependent organizations back then, and it still really is. So I felt like the answer was to manage things well, manage things wisely, and that if you don't manage things well, you're not going to have a mission. If you manage them well and still hang on to your heart and your passion, then you can have a mission as well. And the thing that I was able to prove to those who doubted in the beginning was that they could actually do better financially and still do that work that was their mission, to help people in their sobriety. So really our mission was to support people in their sobriety, help them stabilize in their sobriety. I remember one little anecdote or promise I made early on was I said, well, if you stick with me, I'm going to actually make you work. But if you work, I'm going to promise you, you're going to make 30% more within 2 years. Fortunately, I was able to fulfill that promise in a year.
It's amazing.
They were all making 30% more within less than the 2 years, in around a year. And it was just simply because we started using good, sound business practices. They were allowing people to fool around too much, and
Gotcha.
we just did things more efficiently,
Sure.
and that way people actually got to make a little more money.
Well, so I have this. There's a family-owned business that there's a slogan on there. It says, family-owned, operated, and argued over for X amount of years, right? So not to create tension, but to create, like, what are some fun stories or some fun, like, hey, here's a moment where I was like, oof, it was owned, operating. We may have argued over this a little bit. Like, what are some maybe situations and lessons you learned from those situations for those who are watching? They're like, hey, we have a family-owned business, because I think there's a lot of family-owned businesses out there that are like, man, when you owned and operated, yes. Argued over, yes. Like, what are some stories and situations and even solutions that you can share with us?
And before they answer that, just to give a little bit of context, it was truly a family affair, right? So
Yeah.
your initially your business partner was your
My niece, my sister's daughter.
And so she had her husband, her children working in the business. You had your 2 daughters. Both of our husbands worked there. My husband's sister worked there. I mean, it was like it just kept going, right? In terms of all of the family that we had a part of the business.
It seemed like eventually, whenever you had a family member that needed a job, they just came to us and we just hired them.
Really?
We needed people at that time. It's a tendency, I think, of family-owned businesses to kind of take in everybody, and then eventually you really have to find each other's strengths and what they can add to it. And then not every family member made the cut eventually.
Yep.
Or wanted to.
But we never had any arguments, did we?
Oh, no. Well, okay. Well, one of our strong rules was we couldn't talk business at home.
Yeah.
So our weekly family
We had to
dinner,
turn it off.
we did not talk business.
Wow.
Because you could and you wanted to, but we had to separate. Honestly, my daughters would call me by my first name in the office. And then I'd get in the car on the way home, and one of them would call and go, "Hey, Mom, I was just going to ask you about," and they'd start talking, and it was that big of a switch that we turned on and off.
I think that's a really, even in that, that's a brilliant lesson. Because, I mean, the separation, the turn it off, because it's so easy to bring it home and continue to talk about it. Then you don't ever truly get a break.
Right.
And then it's like, we just work all the time. That's what we do. And so I love that. And then even because I've been in the office and I've seen Allie and Angelica both say Bill and Lisa. Yeah. Hey, Bill. Hey, Lisa. And I was like, it just seems so strange. But in that context, it seems so correct. Because, you know, like if someone doesn't quite know, or if they're new, or if they're a salesperson in the space, or, you know, and they're like, hey, Mom, or hey, Dad,
it's not good.
It's not professional.
No.
You don't want to make other people feel like they're sitting in on your family dinner when you're having a meeting at work.
That's a great point.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't want this to be dad and this to be daughter. You want it to be like, this is the CEO.
Yeah.
This is, you know, and that's who they're speaking to, and that's the level at which they're speaking to you on. So that was really the reasoning for that.
And I will say it's interesting
Yeah.
to talk about like hiring family members
Yeah.
but one thing that I always have to, when Allie and I are talking about this and talking to our coaching clients about it, like she talks about working for the family business, and what I have in my mind when I think family business, I think mom pop shop. Because so often when you think family business, it is a mom pop shop. But I think the thing that I always give context to it, because by the time you're at the space, you know, you said 25 years you were leading it. Like when you sold it to Angelica, you had 150 team members?
180.
180 team members.
180. Yeah.
Wow. And I was like
Yes.
far less than 10% of that was family. You had less than.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, way
At
less.
that point,
That had
yes.
narrowed down quite a bit at that point. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's pretty significant, even like for a family member to come inside or come in and work. Like it really is like, even like my son Jack worked for the company, like seasonally or whatnot. But no one's like, oh, that's Bill's grandson or that's Allie's.
We wouldn't introduce ourselves that way.
Right.
We would have new employees that would find out weeks later she was my daughter or we were married. But we wouldn't start out that way with
Sure.
people.
Yeah.
We didn't want them to feel like they were coming into a family-owned business, even though it was.
We wanted it to feel like a family for everyone. And there was a really
That's a good
strong
point.
line of, like, we all got the talk, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell
We-
them about the talk if
Yeah.
any family member was hired.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to avoid nepotism.
That's
like
the word I was
plague.
trying to think of. I was like,
Yeah.
what is that word?
Yeah.
Nepotism.
Yeah,
Okay.
we wanted to avoid that. And so nepotism is not hiring someone who's qualified and able and willing to do the job. It doesn't mean it's nepotism just because they're a relative. What that really implies, what that word implies, is that you're doing favors for people who are relatives or friends, and they're not doing the job, and they're not qualified.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we ran into a few problems. They're not really competency problems. They were more behavioral. And there was a point where, yes, I had,
Entitlement, right?
yeah, I had the talk and openly with those who were members of the family. And then I followed it up with a letter in writing that, hey, you're going to adhere to the same rules as everyone else in the company. And if you can't make it to work on time, if you can't do this, you'll be disciplined and you may be terminated just like anyone else. So do not expect any special favor because you're related to me.
And in fact, there was a bit of an expectation, like, we're going to be the exemplary,
Yeah.
you
Yes,
know, like,
I expect more out of you,
employees.
not less.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
And I would advocate for that. I would say
Yeah.
that's the way you ought to do it if you have
Right.
family in your business.
Well, so let me ask this then, Allie, you were a family member in the business.
I was.
You were a daughter of the, you know, and a granddaughter of the founder, now owner, operator, CEO. Were there any times where people, you know, based upon this conversation, you got the letter, exemplary employee, that people were like, oh, well, you're Bill's daughter, you're Lisa's daughter. Did you ever get that? Were there moments like that you remember specific situations, or was like, no, it just, the way we ran it, that didn't happen?
You know, I honestly never because a lot of times people aren't going to say that to your face, right?
Sure.
But I don't really think I ever even caught wind of that being the impression, although it might have been. I think people who were close enough to us within the organization really understood that we were in the roles that we were because we were gifted in those ways. And there's a lot of accountability, and we were all held accountable to what, the role that we were in and being effective in that. And so I think because there were such clear processes and everybody adhered to them, like it was pretty clear, like we were playing by the same rules everybody else was. And so I really don't think that was an issue. In fact, the most interesting dynamics, I would say that, at least for me in my experience working, I reported to my sister. She was my boss. And then I actually was my sister-in-law's boss. And so there's these weird relationships. Like I lived with my sister-in-law and I was her boss. So like she would walk into my office for like our status, and we'd have to have tough conversations or whatever sometimes. I mean, she was awesome, but she made it easy to manage her. And then we'd go home together and go work out together, go show up at family dinner together.
Right.
I mean, it's just, those were such the interesting dynamics. And I think that's what's really, really challenging, is like having this deeper relationship, but still work is work. And like, we have to keep it at that level. And the only way we could do that was through having like clear processes we followed and expectations that we agreed on. And so then when you're not meeting the expectation, it's much easier to be like, hey, Tyr, what's going on? Because we just have such clarity in all of that ahead of time.
Well, and reported to my daughter, Allie's sister. But clearly she was the one that should be running that part of the company. And really, when I thought about it, I didn't want that job. So it's not hard to report to people who are really good and qualified, family or not.
But they have to be qualified, right? Like that's
Right.
not going to work if there is nepotism and people are.
And that was the key, right?
Yeah.
But
I
I was
love
still
this.
mom on the weekend.
Or on the way
And
home
grandma.
even.
She still
And
rolled
on
the
the way
roost
home,
at
I love
home.
it.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I love this conversation, and I want to invite you back next time. We're going to have more in this family business series in weight coaching. So thank you for tuning in today. Be sure to come back. Bill and Lisa, thank you for joining us
Yeah,
today.
it was
for
fun.
having
It
us.
was
So great to
fun.
have you guys.
Thanks.
Awesome.